Hello, I'm Lubna Aslam. I'm thriving while living with type 2 diabetes. I'm 46 years old, and my journey with diabetes has been filled with challenges and triumphs. I've always been an active person, but in 2002, my life took an unexpected turn when I sustained a spinal cord injury. This meant I would be using a manual wheelchair as my mobility device for the rest of my life. Just 2 years later, I gave birth to my son in 2004, followed by my daughter in 2006. Balancing parenting, immigration, and living with a disability proved to be a complex equation. I had to compromise my physical activity, leading to overwhelming stress. In 2014, I received my diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, which presented a very unique conflict. My eternal optimism clashed with my sweet tooth. Over the years, I settled down in my new home in Canada. My kids became more independent, and I realized it was time to prioritize my health. Today, I find joy in occasional swimming, regular wheeling in my neighborhood, seated yoga sessions, and working out using my handbag exercise machine regularly. And I listen to music when I do that. Thank you for letting me share my journey of self-discovery, resilience, and learning to find the right balance in life. It is my pleasure to introduce the speakers for today's session on exercise snacks and staying motivated to move your body. Dr. Jonathan Little is a professor in the School of Health and Exercise Sciences at UBC Okanagan. Dr. Little's lab seeks to better understand the biological factors that lead to development and progression of type 2 diabetes and how exercise and nutrition can be used to prevent, treat, and even reverse type 2 diabetes. Dr. Little is a known expert around the world with respect to health benefits of high-intensity interval training, HIIT, and has helped pioneer the exercise snack approach. With funding from Diabetes Canada, Dr. Little's team is translating the exercise snacks approach from lab to real world with goal of helping type 2 diabetes become more active and improve their overall health. Dr. Hashim Islam is postdoctoral fellow in the Exercise, Metabolism, and Inflammation Lab at UBC Okanagan. His research broadly focuses on the mechanisms that underpin chronic inflammation with type 2 diabetes and the anti-inflammatory effects of exercise and nutritional interventions. Hashim is also coordinating an upcoming multi-center trial exploring how exercise snacks can help people living with type 2 diabetes become more active in their day-to-day lives, improve their fitness, and better control their blood sugar throughout the day. Joining them are John Farrell and Tiffany Bridges. John is a member of Diabetes Canada's People Affected by Diabetes Advisory Council and Team Diabetes alumni member and a successful marathon runner who is living well with type 2 diabetes. And Tiffany is a nurse, triathlete, endurance athlete who's not letting type 1 diabetes stop her from anything. Over to you, John, to kick things off.
Hi, my name is John Farrell, and I'm living with type 2 diabetes and have been for approximately 10 years. However, my journey with diabetes actually began 17 years ago in 2006 when my son Ryan was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So for a number of years, I was a caregiver. I was shuttling Ryan to and from appointments with his endocrinologist, helping him with counting carbs and other mysteries of the diabetic treatment. The technology at the time of his diagnosis required him to be awakened nightly for a correcting insulin shot. Boy, have times changed. During this time, I also had blood tests where it was determined that I was in fact heading for type 2 diabetes with higher than normal blood sugar. While I was a very active teen and played on all school sports teams, my working life took over my overall personal care. I worked long hours at a desk, ate meals on the run, and found little time for exercise. Does that sound familiar? Having lived through what Ryan had to contend with, I had a chat with myself and made some immediate changes in my lifestyle. I started to exercise. I was told one of the ways to burn off excess sugar in my blood was to increase my heart rate through exercise. So, like the movie with the yellow brick road, I started at the beginning. I started walking. I started with a brisk 3 to 4 times a week for about 45 minutes. My Apple Watch recorded my heart rate, and yes, indeed, it was going up when I exercised. I repeated this exercise for about 4 to 5 weeks, but I found it was getting harder and harder to keep my heart rate up, guess what? I was getting in better and better shape. And my finger pricking proved that my blood sugar levels were also declining. I also started losing some of my excess weight. It did take a while to see results, and there were times when I wondered if this was the right thing for me. There were times I was discouraged, but with continued support from my kids, I was not going to stop. I just needed to find the right gear to move forward, and I found it. My walking routine plateaued, and my heart rate had evened out, but I wasn't at the level I wanted. So I tried something else. In the neighborhood where I walk through, there are a number of street intersections. One day, I challenged myself to run between the intersections, stop and rest. Wow, I could do this. Not having run or jogged since high school, this was the beginning of my running career. Each exercise period had me running further and further. From that day forward, I learned to extend my running after a walking warm-up. In a typical 5K walk, I was now running 4+ kilometers. My father-in-law once told me that the most important part of a car are the tires. And this translates into running or walking. You need the appropriate footwear. They do not need to be expensive ultra athlete shoes, but places like Running Room will get you outfitted. With new shoes, my feet were well cushioned and protected. A t-shirt, shorts, and a running jacket added to my wardrobe. Ryan and my daughter Caitlin started to run with me. I was now a runner, and we would run the route several times per week. I started this program alone, and now I had 2 partners, other than my iPod. While I cherished the company of my kids while running, I was worried that either I would not be keeping up with them, or vice versa, they could not keep up with me. Either could be problematic. It took some sorting out, but we managed. I also found that the Running Room also offers free running classes for every level of runner, whether you're preparing for a race or not. They meet weekly and you run with a group of people. Just for the fun of it, it continues to be an option for me. John Stanton, the founder of the Running Room, is quoted as saying, "It starts with running for a minute and escalates quickly to a 5K, then 10K, a half marathon, and then a full marathon. It says you become a lifelong runner." I have a competitive nature, and we've always looked for a challenge. It presented itself in 2007 when Caitlin and I registered for our first organized race. It was a CIBC Run for the Cure in Ottawa. We talked throughout the race, and we made it clear that we would stop and rest if either of us was tired. However, the adrenaline we both felt carried us nonstop from the beginning to a hug-infested finish. So 16 years have come and gone. I'm now 64. I have continued to run and have joined with both kids in a number of races. Ryan and I joined then the Team Diabetes and raised over $45,000 for diabetes research over a 10-year period. We have run in Munich, Reykjavik, Edinburgh, Grand Cayman, Jamaica, and Bahamas. According to my Apple Watch, I've completed over 2,300 training runs and am closing in on 20,000 kilometers since I started tracking my runs. These include 3 marathons, 29 half marathons, and a host of 10Ks and 5Ks and over 150 timed races. I have never thought of giving up running as I continue to enjoy the benefits. I am much slimmer, my A1C is manageable, and my stress level is lower, and I'm a happier person. I have good days and not so good days. I've had my share of strains and pulled muscles, but everyone I meet through the running community share the same issues. The running community is filled with people just like you. So start small. Running works for me, but it may not be your cup of tea. The important thing is to stay active and to keep moving. Thanks for listening to my journey. And now we'll pass things over to Dr. Little and Dr. Islam.
Thanks, John. My name is Jonathan Little, and I'm a professor at University of British Columbia at the Okanagan campus in Kelowna.
And I'm Hashim Islam, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow in John's lab here at UBC Okanagan.
I'll just start with a few disclosures. I have research operating grant funding from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, Diabetes Canada, NSERC, and various other charities and organizations. I don't have any specific disclosures, I think, that will affect anything I talk about today, but I am the Chief Scientific Officer for a charity called the Institute for Personalized Therapeutic Nutrition, and I hold shares in a private company that is trying to develop non-invasive metabolic monitoring devices. But today we're going to talk about exercise and diabetes, particularly exercise and type 2 diabetes. And I guess we'll start off with just a big picture overview of how your blood sugars are regulated. We know that in diabetes, the disease is diagnosed with high blood sugars. So, what happens, Hashem, when you eat some carbohydrates? What happens to your blood sugar levels, and how's it regulated?
Yeah, sure. So when we eat a meal, typically it'll be a mixed meal. It'll have some carbohydrates, some proteins, and some fats. So when we ingest and digest that food, our intestines will kind of extract the glucose or carbohydrates from that food. So it'll break down that ingested carbohydrate into glucose, or simply known as sugar. And this will cause our blood sugar to go up. So if you were to take, a finger prick within an hour or two after a meal, you would notice that it would be elevated, and that's because our body has broken down that dietary carbohydrate. And now our blood sugar is going up, and so we have lots of sugar available for our tissues to, take up and use for energy, or, store for later on when we might not be eating. Now, when our blood sugar goes up, our body needs a way to deal with this spike in blood sugar, because as I'm sure most of you know, our blood sugar needs to be maintained in kind of a narrow range. So the way our body deals with blood sugar, or specifically increases in blood sugar after a meal, is through a hormone called insulin. So what insulin does is when your blood sugar gets high or increases after a meal, it will signal to our pancreas to release this hormone called insulin. And what insulin does is going to cause the uptake and either storage or utilization of that blood glucose into the various tissues of our body. So again, when we eat, our blood sugar will rise, and that'll signal our body to kind of increase the production of this hormone called insulin, and that's going to allow or signal to our tissues to take up that blood sugar from our blood, and in turn that's going to lower our blood sugar. So that's after we eat a meal, and we're not eating all day, right? So there's going to be periods in between meals when our blood sugar might start to come down, and this is when that sugar that we've taken up into our tissues is stored is now going to be able to be released and taken up by other tissues like our brain and stuff to be able to use for energy. And the way that happens is through a hormone that is kind of the opposite of insulin. It's called glucagon. So when we're fasted or when we're not eating, our body's going to sense that there's no food coming into the body, and we need to release some of that stored substrate. And that's when our pancreas is going to release this hormone called glucagon. And again, as mentioned, glucagon is kind of the opposite of insulin. So whereas insulin promotes the uptake and storage or utilization of glucose, glucagon is going to break down some of that stored glucose and release it into our blood so that it's available for our body. So this is kind of how our blood sugar fluctuates over the day during periods of eating and in between meals when we're fasting, and how those two key hormones kind of regulate blood sugar over the course of the day. So did I miss anything there, John? Or
no, I guess.
You want to add?
Just maybe to summarize there, we eat some food. If it has carbohydrates, blood sugar is going up. Our pancreas senses that, says, hey, produce some insulin, tells our tissues to take that glucose up. It comes back down. If we haven't eaten for a long time, like after an overnight fast, for example, glucagon would be higher, which is telling our bodies produce some glucose so that we can maintain our blood sugars. I guess maybe just what are some of the key tissues? What's the key tissue that takes the glucose up out of the bloodstream, and what's the key tissue that releases glucose into the bloodstream, Hashem?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I forgot to mention, but so thanks for pointing that out. But one of the main sites for glucose uptake and storage within our body is our muscle, right? So our skeletal muscle, so our quads, our biceps, our chest, our back, so on and so forth. All the skeletal muscles in our body, they have these large storage sites for glucose. It's stored in the form of a molecule called glycogen. So that's kind of the storage form of glucose within our body. So that's kind of the main tissue where that glucose that we ingest is stored. Now there's also a significant amount of glucose that's stored as glycogen within our liver, and the liver is really the key tissue that plays a role in releasing that stored sugar, periods of fasting, in between meals, and particularly during the overnight fasted state. So,
Okay,
yeah.
so muscle's the key tissue that takes it up, liver's
Yes.
the key tissue that
That's right.
kicks it out.
That's right.
I think we'll probably get back to
Yeah.
to muscle and how to engage muscle in a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
and obviously this is the diabetes dialogue. So just to cover, I know probably some of the listeners or watchers are more experts in diabetes than we are. Persons with lived experience would know this more than us, but just to highlight the differences between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So Hasha mentioned that blood sugar that's floating around. I've heard it, you only have 1 or 2 teaspoons of actual sugar floating in your blood at any one time. So our bodies are normally very, very good at trying to tightly regulate how much sugar is available in the blood. And type 1 diabetes, of course, is the situation where it's autoimmune disease. So our own immune system has attacked the beta cells in the pancreas. So someone with type 1 diabetes does not make insulin, has to take insulin either through a pump or through shots in order to be able to regulate their blood sugars.
Right.
Type 2 diabetes is a little bit different, right? And that's the case where the insulin isn't working very good, so kind of the signal isn't getting through, and then eventually or later on, then the pancreas starts to fail, and individuals or may fail, and individuals with type 2 diabetes would then also have low insulin and maybe the need for taking insulin shots. So those are the two main types of diabetes. Obviously, we've got gestational diabetes and LADA and other diabetes, but the main type 1 and type 2 are a little different in that, but they also can be kind of the same. So that concept of insulin resistance, when I was talking about the type 2 diabetes, the insulin doesn't work as well to signal our muscles to take up the glucose. That also happens in type 1 diabetes too, right? So individuals with type 1 diabetes can also be insulin resistant. And I think that'll be important when we talk a little bit about exercise and how you might be able to overcome or circumvent any insulin resistance. So, all right, so...
I was just gonna jump in there. Is one more common than the other? Maybe which one's more prevalent and affects a larger proportion of the population?
Yes. Great point. Just to highlight that. So, type 1 diabetes is probably about 10% of the people diagnosed with diabetes in Canada. So there's over 3 million individuals who have diabetes in Canada. About 10% are type 1. And about 90% are type 2 diabetes, and obviously both conditions have been on the rise over the years. But type 2 diabetes is the condition that has been on the rise even more. It's linked. The main risk factors would be age. So as you get older, your tissues tend to become insulin resistant, and that can contribute to your risk for type 2 diabetes. And then diet. Overweight or obesity status, and physical activity or exercise are other major risk factors. And we're going to focus on the physical activity or exercise aspect today. So I guess with that, why is exercise good for someone with diabetes, either type 1 or type 2?
Sure, yeah. So I think exercise is one of the most powerful things you can do for your body in general, and diabetes is no exception. So exercise is very powerful health effects for people living with both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So again, I just want to remind you that when we eat a meal, our blood sugar goes up, and the hormone insulin is going to clear that blood sugar from our blood into our tissues, predominantly skeletal muscle, which is one of the main storage sites for sugar in our body. Now, as John mentioned, people living with diabetes, their tissues might be resistant to the effects of insulin, meaning that when our pancreas releases insulin, it will go to our muscle and our liver and other tissues, but those tissues won't respond to the insulin as much. So in the case of our skeletal muscle, our insulin might not be able to promote the uptake and storage of glucose in our muscle as effectively in people living with diabetes. And this is where exercise comes in, because when we exercise, we contract our muscles. And the really cool thing about exercise, muscle contraction during exercise, is that that'll promote the uptake of glucose into our muscles independent of insulin. So, there's transporters for glucose in our muscle, and normally it's insulin's job to, activate these transporters so they can take up blood glucose. But again, in people who are insulin resistant, insulin might not work as well, but exercise does the same thing. It's also gonna, activate these GLUT4 transporters, they're called, in our muscle, and that's gonna allow our muscle cells to take up that blood sugar during the actual exercise bout. So this is kind of the, immediate effect of exercise. So, while we're exercising, we're activating those GLUT4 transporters in our muscle, and independent of the effects of insulin, that's going to cause, our blood sugar to drop because it's going to get taken up into our muscles. Does that sound?
So it's almost, not tricking, but it's almost like you can circumvent the insulin resistance and use muscle contraction to cause the same kind of or similar molecular pathways, which then get glucose to go into the muscle. Mm-hmm. And just a fun fact, we've been, Canada has a long history of great diabetes researchers, obviously, with Banting and Best. A lot of that research was actually done at the University of Toronto by a researcher, Ira Clip, to show that those GLUT4 transporters, not to get too much into the molecular details, those GLUT transporters, it's really cool. You have a pool that responds to insulin, and then you have a separate pool, like a different group of those GLUT4 transporters that responds to muscle contraction and exercise. So the insulin ones aren't working, but the exercise ones work just fine in people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So you can kind of use exercise as your as a supplement for insulin to tell the tissues to take up glucose, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's going on during the exercise bout itself, right? So it's kind of an immediate effect of exercise. So while you're exercising, you're contracting muscle, and all that good stuff is happening to allow your muscle to take up that glucose. But what's really cool is that when you exercise, it also sensitizes your muscle to the effects of insulin for up to 48 hours, 2 days after the exercise bout, right? And what this means is that after you stopped exercising, now when you eat your next meal and your blood sugar goes up, and then your insulin goes up to try and clear that blood glucose, now your muscle is going to be more sensitive to the effects of insulin. So again, in people who may be experiencing insulin resistance, when they've exercised, that insulin sensitizing effect of that exercise bout is going to be now present, and insulin is going to work better for up to 2 days after the acute exercise bout, which again highlights how powerful the effects of exercise are for people living with type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, and I'm sure people with type 1 diabetes can see that. They know that. They have to adjust their insulin dose often after exercise, or if they've exercised the day before.
Yeah.
So that's cool when you hear people talk about that. It's a very direct way to see the insulin sensitizing effect of exercise.
Yeah.
So you have benefits immediately or right away while you're exercising, and then you have benefits for the next 1 to 2 days with this insulin sensitizing effect. So that's really cool. I noticed you didn't mention weight loss or anything like that there, and I think that's a powerful message that you don't
even
have
without
to,
weight loss. You can have some of these effects of exercise on glucose uptake in your body. So
it's almost like every bout of exercise you do is like a dose of medicine.
Exactly.
It lowers your glucose and sensitizes your muscles for the next day or so.
Yeah. So kind of knowing this, John, like how exercise impacts blood sugar control both during and for 2 days after the exercise bout. So how can people living with diabetes, both type 1 and type 2, kind of take advantage of this information and implement it into their lives to experience the benefits of exercise?
Yeah, great question, and I love talking about this, and obviously both of us are passionate about exercise, but this is where knowing a little bit of the physiology, you can then use exercise to your advantage to help your blood sugars. So the first one that I always recommend as a great tool, we've done some research, as have others, on this, is post-meal walking or post-meal exercise. So again, if you think of the physiology we talked about there, you consume a meal, your glucose is going up, insulin is produced, it's not working that well in someone with type 2 diabetes, but the exercise and the muscle and those GLUT transporters work just fine. So you go out for a light, easy walk, 15 to 30 minutes after a meal. That will blunt that blood sugar spike and improve your overall glucose control. And there's really cool studies on this post-meal walking, or it doesn't have to be walking, but it's post-meal walking is easy, post-meal exercise, in order to kind of tell your muscles to take up the glucose while it's rising. So that's one thing you can do. And if you have a continuous glucose monitor or prick your finger, you can often see this pretty clearly. You have a meal, prick your finger, your glucose might be at 9 or 10. You go for a 15-minute walk and it's down at 6 or 7. It's very powerful to see. So I think timing exercise after your meals is one key thing. And then the other point is that because that insulin sensitizing effect lasts for 1 or 2 days, the concept there of making exercise part of your regular routine, right? Thinking of it as a dose of insulin sensitizing medicine that you would do every 1 or 2 days, and that's why the Diabetes Canada guidelines state, they suggest or state no more than 2 days off in between exercise bouts, and that's because of that powerful, profound effect of every bout of exercise. And I always also like to point out to individuals that idea that every bout of exercise you do sensitizes your muscles for the next 1 or 2 days, it should tell you, like, hey, even if you haven't exercised for, it's always tough to stick to exercise, and I know we'll talk about that later, but if you haven't exercised for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a couple of years, if you go out for that walk, if you do that hike, if you do that exercise, you're going to get the benefits. You don't need to exercise and lose weight and have all of these different adaptations. Every bout that you do counts, and if you get out there, you're gonna get that dose of insulin sensitizing exercise.
Yeah, it is kind of like taking a medicine. As soon as you take it, the effects will still be present. Now, you mentioned timing it after meals, John, and obviously some people living with diabetes will have access to a continuous glucose monitor, so they can see when their blood sugar goes up. But what would you say is the optimal kind of window of time where you'd want to time your exercise after a meal? I know that it might differ between different people, but
there's been a little bit of research on that, and generally the suggestion there is about 15 to 30 minutes after your meal to start your walk, and again, the studies differ obviously, but as short as a 15-minute walk, 30 minutes after a meal. I don't think you need to get that exact in it, but that would be my suggestion, because it's about 30 minutes after a meal when sugar starts to really rise, and then you can kind of knock down that spike by going for that walk.
No, thanks for clarifying. So that's all great. As you can all probably tell, exercise has very powerful effect for blood glucose regulation, but what's challenging for most people is being able to get enough exercise in their day. I'd say half of the Canadian population is classified as being insufficiently active, meaning that there's the Canadian guidelines for physical activity that say you should get approximately 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity per week. This would be like a 30-minute exercise session every day for 5 days of the week would get you there. But you can, as John mentioned, also accumulate this in shorter bouts of exercise. So we know that exercise is good for diabetes, but we also know that most people find it hard to achieve enough exercise. And some of the common reasons people say that they don't achieve enough exercise, time is a big one, with work, family life, all the other responsibilities over your day. It's hard to carve out a specific amount of allocated or dedicated time to get that bout of exercise. And so time is one of the most often cited barriers that we see in research studies for not achieving enough exercise. Obviously, most people, we're in a lab right now, we have treadmills and bikes behind us, but most people don't have exercise equipment available in their homes or very accessible. So that this is another key barrier that prevents people from achieving that recommended about of weekly physical activity. And again, going to the gym to access those facilities further adds time, and then goes back to that first barrier, which is not enough time to to get exercise. And of course, you know, gym memberships and stuff, or even buying your own equipment, it comes with associated costs. So people aren't active, but there's reasons for that, you know, timing, access to gym facilities, and cost being some of the major ones. So
yeah, and I think also, I think we'll get to it in the next part, but individuals can often feel maybe a little uncomfortable, or you don't feel like
that's a good point.
you fit in. You don't want to go to the gym environment when you're just starting out. There can be some stigma or that involved, and I think we've got some funding from Diabetes Canada to try to help overcome some of these barriers. So this concept, which we'll talk about, of exercise snacks, but yeah, how can you overcome some of these barriers, or what might be a strategy or some strategies to overcome that?
Yeah. So again, those three key barriers that I highlighted, you know, time, access to gym and facilities, and as John mentioned, you know, stigma. We think an approach to overcome some of these barriers simultaneously is an approach called exercise snacks. So first of all, what are exercise snacks? So exercise snacks are very short bouts of vigorous activity. So the way we define them, and the way, you know, studies in the research literature have kind of defined them, is, you know, 1 minute or less bouts of vigorous exercise. Vigorous, you know, it gets your heart rate up, gets you breathing hard, you know, you feel like you're exercising. If you were to rate it on a scale of 10, it'd be like 5 or 6 out of 10. So there are these short, vigorous bouts of exercise performed sporadically over the day, you know, 3 to 5 times over the course of the day. So they don't have to be performed at a specific time of the day. They can be very kind of random or sporadic. So you can, whenever you get time over the day, you can get up and do a 1 minute exercise snack. And then this still allows you to get some vigorous exercise into your day without having to go to the gym, without having to plan, you know, a structured 30-minute session of exercise into your daily lives. And of course, you can do this in your home. You can do this in a private space. So some of that, you know, stigma that people might feel going to the gym or something, that's also kind of reduced.
I bet you they would also help break up your sitting time,
That's
which
right,
we
that's
know
right.
sitting for long periods of time
yeah.
in our society is common. So
Yeah.
we've been sitting here for probably 15-20 minutes.
Yeah.
So why don't we
should probably
do an exercise snack?
Yeah.
All right, you go first.
Okay, sure. I'll demonstrate an exercise snack here. So a really, really simple one that, you know, I like to do is just called what would you call it? Running in place, or change your direction run. So essentially what you do is just you'd run back and forth. Again, we're aiming for a minute. So if you have more space, you can use more space, but Johnny, timing me here? Or?
Yeah, I got a timer. 15 seconds in.
Oh, 15 seconds in, all right. So yeah, just back and forth. Again, you want to be as vigorous as you can, and I can already feel my kind of breathing going up. Am I 30 seconds in yet,
Yeah,
John?
you're 30 seconds now.
Okay. So 30 seconds in, and you know what? If you've done 30 seconds of aerobic activity, you might want to switch it up with some, you know, resistance-based activity. So I'm going to go body weight squats. Getting hard to talk doing this exercise snack. And then lunges. So they're very versatile, right? You can mix in different things. What are we at, John?
10 more seconds.
10 more seconds.
All right, you're making me feel bad.
All
I feel
right.
like I should do a
There we
exercise
go.
snack too.
Got my heart rate up to 100 beats per minute there, so not bad for 1 minute.
Okay, so I'm wearing dress shoes. I'm maybe not as prepared as Hashem for doing an exercise snack, but this is the beauty of them, is that you can do them with any clothing on almost anywhere. You don't really sweat in a minute or less, and you can feel good. So I'm just gonna do some side-to-side lunges. I could do at my desk. I could do it in front of the couch. I could do it while I'm watching TV. And then maybe my knees are starting to hurt a little bit. That feels not good. So then maybe I might go into plank. Maybe I try to do some mountain climbers. Now I'm starting to breathe heavy.
Almost there. 15 seconds to a minute.
And then I might finish off with some squats with the overhead. Get some more muscles engaged. Get more muscles engaged. Whew.
And
more
there you
glucose.
go. That's 1 minute exercise.
All right.
Nice work.
I didn't think we were going to be exercising today in this talk.
Yeah, so again, you can kind of see from both of us demonstrating an exercise snack that they can be fairly practical. You can do them wearing more casual attire like me, or even, more formal dress clothes like John. And you can kind of mix them up, add in movements that you like. And, some people might have a bad knee, so they might not like body weight squats, but some of the other exercises might appeal more to them. So they're very versatile, they're time efficient, they can be done without the use of any kind of special exercise equipment. And that's kind of what makes them really attractive as a physical activity strategy for most people who, again, cite those barriers of time, access, and stigma for not achieving enough physical activity.
Yeah, so we were fortunate enough to get some funding from Diabetes Canada in order to try to test this out in people living with type 2 diabetes. So we've got that study just going to start in the new year, where we'll be testing out in the real world whether people living with type 2 diabetes can do these exercise snacks, and then we'll test what it does to their blood sugars using continuous glucose monitoring, how it affects their fitness, how do they feel when they're doing them, and we're really excited to see the results. That study will happen here in Kelowna, as well as with Professor Martin Gabala's lab in McMaster University. So both Hamilton and Kelowna will have sites, and we'll be testing out this kind of concept of exercise snacks for the first time in people with type 2 diabetes. So stay tuned. It always takes longer than you want. So a couple of years before we'll know the results of that. But it's something that I think everyone watching today could start incorporating into their lives if they wanted, with any sort of movement activity that they find enjoyable and that they can do.
And John mentioned in the real world. So I think so far we've done these exercise snacks in the lab, right? So we've gotten people to come in and we've got them to do, either an exercise snack using stairs or maybe a quick exercise snack on a bike. So we've measured these things in the lab and see how it impacts their, blood sugar, blood insulin, so on and so forth, their fitness under controlled laboratory settings. So I think this is a really novel aspect of the study, is we're taking the exercise snacks approach from the laboratory to the real world, right? Because if we want people to experience and benefit from this, it needs to be implemented in people's day-to-day lives, whether that be at home, work, school, wherever you might be. So I think that's a really cool kind of aspect of this intervention.
Yeah, totally. And two things there. So one of the real world aspects is we've helped to develop an app and a online platform for people to be able to track, and then there's videos giving them suggestions for exercise snacks and that sort of thing. So that's one area where we may be able to make it more in the real world, because obviously, you don't want to be coming into the lab multiple times a day. The whole idea is you can do this anywhere. The other thing you mentioned, I forgot, my favorite exercise snack is stairs. This is an easy way to incorporate some vigorous exercise in your day. My office is on the 3rd floor here, and instead of taking the elevator, I go to the stairs. And all you need to do in our studies that we've done, we just tell people to ascend to the stairs as quickly and safely as possible. So you don't need to sprint all out. You're saying, hey, I've encountered something that can incorporate some vigorous exercise. I'll do a stair climbing snack.
Yeah, just pick up the pace, right? That's all.
And we just published a cool study showing that people in the workplace that work in office towers can do this and incorporate it. And when they do exercise snacks, on those days their sedentary and sitting time is reduced. So it does look like there are some benefits, and we're getting there in terms of testing this out in the real world.
Yeah. And the sitting, like the breaking up the sedentary time is a really powerful aspect of the approach, because we know that being sedentary and sitting for too long is an independent, risk factor for type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and bad blood sugar control. So that's, I think, really an important added benefit of the approach. So we've talked about a lot of good things about exercise, and again, both John and I are firm believers in exercise. But again, like, as with anything, there's always going to be some considerations or some potential risks associated with it. So John, what are some potential considerations or risks that people living with type 1 or type 2 diabetes might want to take into account when they start engaging in exercise or even exercise snacks?
Yeah, of course. And so, hopefully if you've understood the physiology a little bit we talked about today, and people living with type 1 diabetes know this, risk of hypoglycemia or low blood sugar can always be the case. And again, that's because your muscles are sucking up the glucose. So particularly in type 1 diabetes, or if you have type 2 diabetes taking insulin, if you have too much insulin on board at the same time, then your muscles are taking up the glucose, you can have the risk of hypoglycemia. So individuals may need to adjust their insulin dose. You and I are not medical doctors or diabetes educators to be able to do that. So you need to work with your doctor and be mindful of that. But that's where taking finger prick glucoses before and after, if you're trying to figure out that balance. In people with type 2 diabetes, the risks of hypoglycemia with exercise are much lower than type 1 diabetes, again, except if you're type 2 diabetes taking insulin. And there's one other type of drug, a sulfonylurea drug, which has some risk of hypoglycemia. So anyone on those medications, I would say, definitely speak with your doctor, your diabetes educator, and be monitoring with finger pricks before and after your exercise bout.
Yeah, and as with anything, it's kind of a risk-benefit balancing act, right, John?
Of course, yeah. So the exercise has a multitude of benefits beyond just your blood sugar, and we know that. So the risk, always anything in life has that risk benefit. It's also important to point out, in the guidelines we suggest that someone living with diabetes starts out with low to moderate exercise. If you haven't been exercising for a while, get used to it, get a little bit of fitness first before you start adding in the hard, the vigorous, the really long type of exercise, and that just makes sense. And again, with the exercise snacks we're talking about, they're relatively new, so we don't know exactly where they fit in, but they're very short, but they're done at a hard effort. So right now we're suggesting that you wouldn't jump in and be doing hard effort exercise day one.
Yeah,
you would want to develop some fitness first, and always before you start something new or something really vigorous, you want to check in with your healthcare provider. Get the clearance, make sure, hey, with my medications, my history, all my things, it's
okay to do this exercise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess we're probably about time to wrap up here, but maybe we should do some take-home points here, Hashem.
Yeah, so I know we covered a lot of information, so I'll try and summarize it in a few kind of key take-home points. So again, exercise has powerful health benefits for glucose control, and that's both immediately during the exercise bout. So while you're exercising, you're contracting those muscles, you're allowing your tissues to take up that blood glucose. But also, again, as we mentioned, for up to 2 days after the exercise bout. So again, those two things highlight how powerful exercise can be for managing your blood sugar. And again, what we're really excited about is this new exercise snacks approach that might be a very practical and accessible way for people living with diabetes to control their blood sugar over the day, and also break up their sedentary time, potentially even improve their fitness. So we think exercise snacks could have a multitude of health boosting effects beyond just blood sugar control. And again, as John nicely covered at the end here, it's always about weighing the risks and benefits. But as I'm sure we've convinced you all, the benefits of exercise far outweigh any potential risks. But again, it's always important to check with your physician, build up slowly as you would with any other exercise program, and make sure you're performing the movements correctly and safely, and just kind of listen to your body, see how you're feeling, and so on and so forth. And I just want to end off by reminding you that we'll be available from 2:15 to 3:15 in the diabetes dialogue rooms tomorrow on November 18th to answer any questions, and we can talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we covered here today.
Okay, well, thanks, Hashem. That was fun.
No, thanks, John. And
we'll turn it over to Tiffany, and she's going to tell you more about her journey with type 1 diabetes and exercise. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Tiffany Bridges. I'm a triathlete, endurance athlete, and nurse, and I'm not letting type 1 diabetes stop me, having just crushed my very first 70.3-mile triathlon. I'm here to tell you a little bit about my journey with diabetes and exercise. You might be wondering how my fitness journey began. It helped that I was already somewhat of an active person to begin with. I swam a lot as a kid, volleyball, track, but nothing serious until 2014. When I started running, thanks to the Learn to Run program from the Running Room, and it basically evolved from there. At the beginning, of course, there were a few challenges. The main challenge I found was trying to fit training into an already packed schedule. I quickly learned that if I wanted to work out, I had to plan and make it priority. Yes, right in the calendar, along with family commitments, housework, and professional work, etc. Soon after I started working out more regularly, I saw major benefits that helped keep me going. I saw huge benefits, not just in my type 1 diabetes, but in my mental health as well. I find I am much calmer, clear-headed, I sleep better, and my energy is better. If I haven't done a workout that day for whatever reason, I notice a huge difference. I feel way more tired and lethargic. So if I don't have any training or workouts on a day, I make sure to at least go for a walk so I get those benefits that I enjoy. Regular activity does require motivation. What I find motivates me is being part of a group or a community. I'm lucky enough to be part of an amazing team of endurance athletes called LP Endurance. Just having that support of people doing the same challenging thing you are and having them cheer you on, even on those sessions that you are suffering through, makes a huge difference. So if you don't like getting out and moving your body on your own, look for a buddy, a neighbor, or a group in your community to help hold you accountable and get started and keep going. My words of wisdom for those just starting out is be patient with yourself and your body. Start slowly and try to notice the progression over time. Don't get discouraged. You will get there, and just be consistent. And for those who are active and are looking to challenge themselves a little bit, find that challenge you're passionate about, and be sure to find the balance of not pushing yourself too hard in a way that puts you in danger. Just like those starting out, slow and steady and monitor your progress. As we all know, diabetes is a big balancing act, so make sure you're paying attention and learn how to adapt. Plans don't always go the way you want, particularly in sports and exercise, so don't stress about it. And again, consistency is key. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the session today. Please join myself and the other speakers on November 18th from 2:15 to 3:15 p.m. in our Diabetes Dialogue Room to have your questions answered. See you then.